Alright, so in this video we're going to go over our class demo for Blueprint Basics number 5, where we're going to build a simple dialogue system. So to kind of show it in action, what we're going to create here, if we walk up to one of our NPCs, we can press our interact key and we can play a dialogue, and then if we press E again, it'll go to the second line, third line, so on and so forth. And then when we walk away, it'll kind of get rid of the dialogue, and then we can place them throughout the level to talk to them. So we can use this, for a simple dialogue tree for an NPC, or we could use it on like a sign or something to give the player some information. But we're basically going to create a little UI widget that pops up on the screen and plays all of our dialogue. So we'll go ahead through that process now. A bit of a prerequisite for this blueprint is we need to make sure we have our interaction blueprint interface created. So if you do not have a interact blueprint interface created in your project, go back to Blueprint Basic number 4, where we go over the process of setting it up. And again, that interface just allows us to kind of generically interact with a variety of blueprints throughout our scene. And we're going to use that interaction as the way to kind of kick off all the code for this simple NPC. So let's get started. So first thing we're going to build is we're going to need a widget, a UI that we toss up on the screen to populate with our dialogue. So I'm just going to right click. I'm going to create a new user interface widget blueprint, grab a user widget, and I'll just call this, name it something you can identify, so maybe like NPC dialogue widget, something specific so you know what it is. And let's open it up. And to this dialogue, to this widget, we're going to add a couple things. So we'll go over to our palette, and first thing we're going to add is a canvas panel. I'm going to add that canvas panel, and then onto the canvas panel we're going to grab a text actor, and we're going to apply this text actor. Next, right now, the canvas kind of represents our screen, and our text is currently sitting up in the corner. We want our text to live around here, so we're going to select the text, go to the details, go up to our anchors option, go down to this one, which represents the bottom center of the screen. We're going to hold Control plus Shift and then click on that center to reposition, re-anchor our text to the bottom center of the screen. Then if we just hit like up on the arrow keys, we can kind of move this up a little bit. And then last thing I'm going to check is I'm going to check on the size to content, which will just change the text box size to match the size of the text going into it. So we got our text, and then next thing we need to do is we need to create a binding to link the contents of the text to a variable. So if we hit the little, with our text selected, go over to the details and find the text. This is where we put like the default text, but we can just leave that and then go over to this little link here. If we press that, we can create a new binding, which will bring us over into the graph side of the editor. We can swap between designer and graph. And in here we can set up something to, define what that text is. So whatever we plug into this return node is going to be what our text displays as. So I'm going to go over to my blueprint kind of over here on the left hand side, go to my variables. I'm going to add a new variable and call this current dialogue. And I'm going to set the variable type to a string. And then I'm going to drag and drop that in here. I'm going to get it. Then I'm going to plug that into the return value. So now this is just a little conversion, but now whatever we set our current dialogue to, and we'll set this in our NPC blueprint, whatever we set this to is what our text down here will display. So with that variable created, we should be good to go on to our next step. So let's compile, let's save, and let's go ahead and make our next blueprint. So the next blueprint we want, let me go back to here, blueprint. So let's create a new blueprint. I'm going to create a blueprint class. I'm going to create an actor. So again, this is kind of our standard blueprint, and this will be our NPC. So our, you can call it something like BP underscore NPC. I'll just call mine NPC demo for now. Let's open that up, and we can start to build out our NPC here. So first thing we got to do, let's add some of the classic components we need. We're going to start with a collision. I'm going to grab a sphere collision. Let's go ahead and scale that up a bit. And then I'm going to also, we can name this something like trigger. And then I'm going to also just add a cube. Something, again, just to act as a visual component so we can see where our NPC is. So this could be a model, could be a sign, whatever you end up needing. But we need a trigger box, something we can collide with, make sure it's scaled up pretty well. Oh, not the box, but the trigger, to make sure we can overlap with it. Remember, if you want to check its size, we can just drag it into the scene and we can make sure that that collision is big enough we can run into it. But it looks good. So from here, we got our two components. Next thing we need to do is we're going to want to utilize that blueprint interface. Now, to enable a blueprint interface on a blueprint, we're going to go up to the class settings. We're going to go over to the implemented interfaces in the details at the bottom. And then we're going to add our BPI interact. Now remember, if you do not have that available, that means you've yet to create your interface. So by now, everyone should have that interact interface created in their project, but if you don't, please go back to video for Blueprint Basics number 4, which should go over the process of creating that. So again, this is just our generic interaction control, and we want to use that in this blueprint. So we go to class settings, add it here, and it works if on the blueprint side over here under interfaces you see that interact interface. So with that added, we're good to start making our code. So I'm going to go to the event graph, I'm going to get rid of these guys, and let's start building this out. So first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a couple variables to get ourselves started. So first one I'm going to add is going to be a Boolean, and this is going to be talking, question mark. And this is going to be our check just to see if we're actively talking or not. The next one we're going to create, this will be our dialogue. So think of this like your script. So what are they going to say? So this is going to be of a type string. And then if we go over to the details, we can change it from a single to an array. Now if we compile and save and go back to that variable, down in the default value, you can see we can start to add a couple different array elements. So think of each of these entries as a line of dialogue, which we're going to cycle through. So for example, I can say this is my first line, second line, third line. So as if you were talking to this NPC, these are the lines of speech they'll actually say. Another thing to note with arrays is that each element of the array has an index assigned to it, which is just like a number. So, this first line of dialogue is index 0, second line is index 1, third line is index 2. So we want to keep these indices in mind because we can use these to basically determine which line of dialogue we want to be showing at any given time. So to help with that, we need our last variable here. We're going to call this dialogue index, which just is going to be of type integer, and then we want to swap it back from an array back to a single. And an integer is just a solid number, so we're basically going to use the index to tell us which line of dialogue to utilize. Alright, so we got our variables we need. Make sure you got all three of these, and we're ready to get going. So first thing we want to do is go ahead up to our interface, right click, and implement the event. And, so when we walk up to this NPC, we'll press our interact button. In my case, it's E. And when we press E, we're going to do whatever we want to do. So first thing we need to do is we need to check if we're talking. So we're going to get the talking variable, and we're going to put that into a branch. So, depending if we're talking or not, we'll do either the true or false option. So we'll leave true empty by now, because by default, we're not talking. So we have to initiate the talking. So out of the false, so this is if we're not talking, we need to do a couple things. First thing we need to do is we need to create our widget and add it to the screen. So I'm going to start by create widget. I'm going to change the class to be my NPC dialog widget, so the one you just created. And then we need to create a reference to this widget. So an easy way to create a reference that we can come back to later is if we right-click on the return value, we can promote it to a variable. It'll just create this set node, leave it just like that, but then go down to your variables down here and go ahead and rename this variable to dialog UI because we're going to need to reference it later. So remember, right-click on the return value, promote to variable, rename it to dialog UI, just so we know what it is, so we can use it later. Great. So after we create that variable, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add to viewport. The target is going to be our new UI piece, right like that. So now when we interact, it's going to toss that UI up on the screen. And then we want to, now we're talking. So we're going to, we're going to set talking to true. So we are now talking. So this first interaction is basically just going to initiate us actually speaking to the NPC. So from here, we need a new event that is our quote-unquote talking event. So this is actually going to move the dialogue around, set the dialogue on our widget. So first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create a custom event. So I'm just going to right-click custom event. I'm going to call this custom event talking. Let's call it talking event. And we want to basically run this event when we interact. So if we want to make that happen at the end of our false here, after we initiate the talking, we just want to now run the talking event. So after I create a custom event, I can now call it wherever I need it. So we're going to add it at the end of our false output here. But now let's actually build this out. So what we're going to do is every time we run the talking event, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get our dialogue from here. We're going to get a copy. And a copy basically looks at the array and then picks out an option based on the index we input, and then just outputs that for us to use. So let's grab our dialog index, plug that in, something like this. And now we need to take the output of this and set this as our current dialog in our widget back here. So in order to access that variable, that's where that reference comes into play, because now I can drag this out here, we can get the UI, and now from the UI we can set current dialog. There's our variable we created. And select that. I'll drag that up here, plug it into our talking event, and then as the current dialog, we'll plug in this guy here. So when we run the talking event, we're going to set the current dialog in our widget to be equal to, our specified index from our dialog list here. So because the default value of this is 0, by the default, the first one it's going to give us is line 0. So after we run it once, we want it to now, when we run it again, we want it to play the next line of dialogue. So after we set it, we need to now change this index to be the same value plus 1. So we can easily do that by dragging out from the dialog index, hit ++ on the keyboard, and grab this increment int, which will just take an integer and add 1 to it. we'll plug it in after the set. Double click on our lines here to reorganize them a bit so don't get too messy. We should have something like this. So this is our talking event. So let's kind of walk through what's going on here again. So when we interact with our NPC, we're going to check, are we talking? If we are not talking, we are going to create our UI, create our widget. We're going to set it as our dialog UI for reference purposes. We're going to add it to the viewport so we can see it. We're going to set our talking variable to true, and then we're going to run the talking event. When we run the talking event, it's going to communicate with our dialog widget, and it's going to set the current dialog equal to the first entry in our array. And then after we set it to the first entry in the array, we're going to add one to the index so that when we run this event again, we're going to display the second entry rather than the first. So every time we do this, we'll go down the line. So of course you could add as many entries to this as you want. So let's compile, let's save, and let's see if this is working. So I have my blueprint in the scene right here. I'm going to press play. I'm going to walk up to it. And if I press E, my UI should pop up and it should play the first line. So E, there's my first line. If I press E again, it's going to run that talking event again, but this time the index has been changed by 1. So it should play my second line. And it does not. So we got to go see what's going on. Oh, and I see what's going on. So if we remember back, when we press E, the first thing it does is it checks this branch here. And if we are talking, it would go through the true. And right now, nothing's in the true. So we need to give it a direction. So once we're in the true, so once we go through this bottom portion once, we set it to talking, so we're already talking. So it's going to try to go through the true. And for the true, we just need to do our talking event again. So talking event, there it is. Something like that. So this and this are the same. So, subsequent interactions will run through the true, which will just progress our dialogue along. So let's compile, let's save, let's go check it again. So I walk up to my NPC, press E, got my first line. If I press E again, I should go to my second line, third line, and then we're done. So in a nutshell, that's basically it. You can make the cube whatever you want. It's just a visual representation. We can add as many extra lines of dialogue as we want. Every time we interact with this, it will continue to move up and up and up our little list there. Basically that's what we got going on. One little extra thing we can do, just to add a little more polish to this, is just make a means for the dialogue to reset itself. So after we're done talking, after we walk away from the NPC, it's going to reset that dialogue index value back to 0, so that when we talk to him again, it's going to reset. It just resets everything, and then we can re-talk to them. So an easy way to do that is utilizing our collision box here. If we right-click our collision box, we can add an event, and we're going to add an end overlap event. And from this end overlap event, we're going to do a couple things. First off, let's grab that reference to our UI, dialog UI, and let's remove from parent. So this will just take it off the screen. And then we need to, we're no longer talking, so let's let's set talking false. And then finally, let's grab that dialog index and set it back to 0. So we should have like 3 things going on. So when we end our overlap with the NPC, so basically we walk out of their boundary, we're going to remove the dialogue from the screen, we're going to set ourselves to no longer talking, and then we're going to set that index back to 0. That way, when we engage with the NPC again, we can start from fresh, re-add it to the scene, start from 0, talk through it again. So here's how that'll look in action. So I walk up, talk, talk, talk. As I walk away, it removes it from the screen, and then if I go back, we can press E and start over again. Walk away, come back, talk again. So if you have, a classic just NPC who just spouts information at you, and you just want them to repeat what they say over and over, this is the way to kind of set up that nice loop. So, this is a great start to get you started with some simple dialogue. Once we have all this information, we can expand it, make it more complex, add a little more functionality to it. But this will absolutely get you started. Remember, if you want to make it a little prettier, you would do that within the designer of your widget. You can add a background, extra stuff, and things here. But this is our basic kind of dialogue system, for just some simple dialogue. Great.